Today we're here with former police officer of 9 years, successful business owner, father of 3, and now the leader of the opposition government here in Australia, the Honourable Peter Dutton. Peter, thank you for coming on.
Great to be with you, Sam. Thank you.
I heard you flew in. You fly in for this?
I have. We've got a pretty busy program here in Sydney, but it's the nature of this job. It's sort of a rolling road show, and you're going from one part of the country to the next. So you meet some amazing people, but it's a constant pace. And so we were running late. I won't say which airline we were flying, but we were late. So my apologies for being so tardy in our arrival time.
Of course, thank you for coming in. And is that what campaigns are like, just moving around the country, talking to people? What's a day in your life look like at the moment?
Well, it is pretty much like that. So the election proper obviously won't start until next year, but you're really in campaign mode now because there's speculation around when the election will be. Could it be called in January? So there's a tempo that you're working to, and we would do probably 6, 8, 9 flights a week. We're in Hobart and Melbourne on the weekend, Brisbane, Sydney, the first part of this week. So, there's always an event or a function in Hobart, and then you need to be in Perth, wherever it might be.
Yeah, because I can imagine with federal politics, unlike state, you've got to go so far, especially with Australia. It's nearly closer to go to New Zealand than to Perth.
Well, that's true, but you always try and sort of get a pretty full program, and media requests sort of back up in each capital city and across the regions as well. So there's a big logistics part to it as well. And fortunately, I don't get too involved in that. I turn up where
a good thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, Dutton, what would I need to understand about your childhood to see how you became the person you are today?
Well, we grew up in the suburbs, and it's still a working class suburb today. In Boondall and on the north side of Brisbane, so close to, people would know it for the entertainment centre up there. I watched my dad work hard as a bricklayer and then a builder.
My dad's the same, actually.
Yeah. I worked out pretty early on that I wasn't hard enough to mix mud or concrete, mud as they call it, and throw some bricks and clean up on building sites. I enjoyed that. And I enjoyed, jumping in the ute and going to work with him, but that was definitely an influence. And then I think the time, the influence of my mum and watching her and my grandparents, one side, mum's side, farmers, and dad's side, my grandfather, who I didn't know, but had been a linesman for the predecessor to Telstra, so putting up that infrastructure. So a pretty basic, normal family operation, I guess I'd describe it as. I was the eldest of 5, and there was 10 years between myself and my youngest sister. So it meant that, I learned how to change nappies pretty quickly and how to push her around in a pram. And I think most big families are like that as well, where the load's shared.
Because I'm one of 5, and all of us are quite close in age. So growing up, there's a lot of arguments and fights. Having a bit of age gap, were there still those arguments and fights, or were you always the eldest one?
It's funny because we're all different in a way, but still pretty close. And we were brought up with a focus on the importance of family, and our kids are all really close. So the cousins, hang out together, and we've been on holidays together, and they'll come over for a swim, or our kids will be driving the younger ones to McDonald's or whatever it might be. So that sort of element of family is really quite nice, and I really enjoy time with my nieces and nephews as well. So it's been handed down to this generation, which is good, and I hope we can pass that sense of family down to them as well.
And after being so successful in business, why go into politics?
I'd always had an interest in politics, if I'm being honest. When I was at school, I finished, like in the dark ages in 1987, so a long time ago. But politics was up in lights at the end of the Bjelke-Petersen era. So it was in your face in a sense. But it was also a period where in the building industry, Dad could quote 10 jobs and get 10, or quote 10 and get none. So it was always a boom bust, much more fluctuating than I think you'd probably see in today's business environment.
Really?
And so that discussion about the influence of high interest rates and government policy was something that was discussed around our kitchen table. So I think whilst I always wanted to be a policeman as a very young child, and had always had that ambition, I became more interested in politics toward the end of, sort of, I guess, year 12, and then beyond that. And I'd always had sort of a small business interest, and worked in a butcher shop and mowed lawns and all sorts of stuff to try and save some money early on.
Yeah.
So I'd had that sort of entrepreneurial interest, and the opportunity came up to run in politics. And I'd also been very frustrated as a policeman. I worked in the sex offenders squad for a while, and other areas where you'd arrest people for serious crimes and be very frustrated by the time the sentence was handed down, which in many cases I just didn't think reflected the severity of the crime that had been committed. And then a realisation, well, if you want to do something about that, politics, being in Parliament and being inside trying to change those laws for the better, that's a sort of the sliding door moment that you've got to decide on.
So being on the front line and just seeing what really happens to these people, and then the offenders not getting the punishment that they need.
Yeah, very much so. And particularly with young girls, young boys who'd been sexually assaulted, and the way in which that altered their lives and their parents' lives.
Yeah.
I remember one case where the parents felt just incredibly guilty because, without going into the detail of it, but they felt the weight of that, and that's a life sentence for them. And a lot of people who are sexually assaulted, for a time at least, in some cases for their life, find it difficult to form relationships and trusting relationships. And I just found it incredibly offensive that they had that life burden and somebody was out within a few years back on the streets leading their own life like nothing had happened.
Yeah, well, thank you for your work you did there.
Thank you, mate. Thank you.
Now, being in charge of AFP when you were Minister for Home and Affairs Minister, you would have then gone from being a police officer to in charge of the police. What was that whirlwind like?
It was a pretty amazing period because I had responsibility for ASIO as well, which is obviously the domestic spy agency. So,
cool.
So you get briefings on lots of cool stuff and see lots of technologies and cyber elements to the job as well. So I've found all of that really interesting, and the people I worked with, in those that were in uniform, I mean, are just so dedicated to our country. They spend time away from their families, and they're just really decent people. So there's an opportunity to see some of them in action, and so I saw it as a real honour to be, having served in uniform at one point, to being in charge of the organisation. I was in the Queensland Police, but had responsibility for the Federal Police. It was incredible to look at it through that lens of leadership.
Being in charge of the ADF, Home Affairs, and really all of our spy agencies, was that exciting, having access to all that information, or was it a scary thing?
I remember going into the first briefing that I had, and there are different levels of briefings that you can get depending on whether you're just a member of the National Security Committee or if you're the Home Affairs Minister or the Defence Minister.
And you would be at the top of that?
Yeah. And so I remember coming out of some of those meetings really confronted by what I heard in terms of the threats that are out there and that are real, what other countries were doing to prepare for conflict, and what that would mean for us in terms of a disruption to our way of life, and like that is really eye-opening. And you walk out of those meetings sort of collecting your breath, and that's ongoing. And then there are operations that you're dealing with, attempted terrorist attacks, and sort of a quick convening of the National Security Committee to get a sense that the right response was being provided, that we had the right resources in place, airlifting people out of Kabul in extremis, and the SAS trying to extract, women and children from the hands of ISIL. They're all pretty incredible experiences. But I think what it really brings home to you is the professionalism. And when we talk about a patriotic pride in our diggers and our Anzacs and the work of the SAS and the commandos and those diggers now, we're right to have that pride, because there's a lot of work that they do saving lives. that Australians never hear of, and they just do it quietly, and thank goodness they do.
I did a little bit of work with the ADF a few weeks ago, and just working with these guys make me proud to be Australian.
Yeah. I think they're, they really feel it because they are patriotic, and they want to protect and defend that legacy, and I think they feel the weight of the continuity of that from the spirit of the Anzacs. That's a real, I think it's an honour for them, but I think they feel that they've got a lot to defend.
For sure. Having access to that ASIO top secret information and then moving out of that role, do you feel yourself stressed about things you knew about that you now don't have control over?
Well, it's a frustration. I mean, the current debate about the anti-Semitism that we're seeing in our country, I feel really frustrated in that debate because I think there are things the government could be doing and that they could have done 12 months ago that would have created a completely different environment than the one we're living in now. And I've got Jewish friends who are talking about leaving Australia to go to Israel.
Safer with the war?
Well, safer. Israel's under threat from a nuclear power in Iran and the Houthis and Hamas and Hezbollah, etc. But they still feel that they would be safer going back to Israel and living here in Australia. And it really breaks my heart because I just don't think we would treat any other part of our community like that. Not the Indian community, not the Chinese community, not Catholics, not Protestants, not atheists. And the anti-Semitism that is there, it's real, it's tangible, and it's not just as bad as it would be if it was just online rhetoric and hatred and memes, etc. But this is physical violence we're talking about. There are armed guards at Jewish schools, and this is real for a big part of our community.
I can imagine. And being the leader of the opposition, I can imagine there's no shortage in pressure. I know there's a lot of pressure when I do.
There's a lot of free advice, mate.
Is it?
There's a lot of free advice in this job. So, but yeah, and the pressure comes with it as well.
Yeah. What's your ways of dealing with pressure?
I think you have to have a clarity and some foundation stones about what you believe in and the values, so that you are guided by an instinct, which I think is a contrast to somebody who has laboured about every decision that they have to make. Some of it has to be instinctive.
A gut feelings?
And a gut feeling, and I think it's guided by experience, by your upbringing, by your mistakes, by your failures, by your successes, and just that general experience. So I think that helps you get through the day. I always describe it in this way, and I've worked closely with 4 prime ministers, and I've watched, obviously, prime ministers on the other side for whom I have respect as well. The good prime ministers, well, every prime minister wakes up with 20 balls in the air, and the really good prime ministers land 15 of them by morning tea and have resolved those issues, and they sweat the next few, and that 5 might take sort of a day or 2 to work out, but maybe they've got 3 solved by the afternoon, and 2 are really difficult issues that aren't going to be resolved easily. The bad prime ministers, the ones without the instinct that I spoke about, have 40 balls in the air by Tuesday and 60 by Wednesday, and it becomes too much. And I think that's the contrast. So I think you have to have that instinct, and I think it has to be guided by your experiences and your values, and then that allows you to then concentrate on the other really difficult issues that provide the stress and are necessarily complex, and it's not an easy solution, and you need to work through and negotiate with others to find the solution.
Because I can imagine it'd be so much problem solving every day, different problems, putting out fires.
Yeah,
and you've just really used clarity through values to make those decisions quickly.
That for me is important, and I think it's and I'm sure it's the same in sport as well, where you're looking at how can you refine this element of your skill, or how can you broaden your network to include a person who brings something that you can't to the equation, or to the problem that you need to solve. It's part of the attraction. If I look back, part of the attraction to policing for me was that I wasn't going to be sitting in an office 9 to 5, processing loan applications, and some people, love that lifestyle, and it's predictable, and you can lock up the filing cabinet at 5 o'clock and forget about it. And some days I'm envious of that. But but I never wanted a job where I was stuck in the office 9 to 5. And in policing, you didn't know what the next radio call was going to be or what was going to happen when you opened that next door. And politics, in a sense, is like that because you need to respond to events of the day, emerging issues domestically and internationally, colleague issues, and particularly as the leader, managing those interpersonal, clashes sometimes that come, and a lot of ambitious people trying to corral that in a positive direction. So, and again, maybe there's a similarity in that it keeps you interested because you just don't know what the next phone call's about.
It's similar to diving in the sense you're an Australian team, everyone's pushing to be their best, but you're also competing against each other, trying to find ways to be better. How do you have such a high performance team and then keep them working together successfully?
Well, it's hard. Tony Abbott used to refer to it as sort of the parish priest, and I think John Howard in a similar way. So, and it's also not.
'Cause then you've got an opposition.
Well, that's right. And it's not like being in business, and sometimes I think people make this mistake. My job you could describe as a chair or a CEO role, but really it's a collective, and it's sort of a group of sole traders that you're bringing together, as opposed to the board of a company that you're providing direction to. And sometimes people can be advancing their own causes, or as we're seeing at the moment, and I think we've been the great beneficiary of this over the last 2.5 years, there's a common purpose that everybody's signed up to, and people aren't playing games and trying to position, and that makes my job easier. And people are right to have ambition. There are some incredibly well-credentialed colleagues and others who are on the backbench, but well and truly deserve to be on the front bench, and trying to manage who to put into the right portfolio, what skill set is important for that stakeholder group, and then matching all of that up in a way that it doesn't cause a tension between individuals. I think that takes experience and time to be able to do that. And I've seen it when we lost government after John Howard lost. We were sort of in this internal, conflict, and we're at war with each other, and it was just not productive. And we're at the polar opposite of that now.
How good! So you got the whole united team in front, because a united front obviously way more powerful than a broken team. So is a lot of your role keeping your team united?
Yes, yeah, and I spend a lot of time on that, and I think it demands that you treat your colleagues with respect, and even on occasion where you don't agree, I think it's a process of talking through, and it's also accepting that you don't get everything right, and I think some leaders can get an arrogance in that regard. So it's listening to the advice and changing your position, or moderating your position, modifying your position if necessary. But it's also the ability to be able to, not thump the desk, but to be forceful in saying, well, I've heard you and I understand your concerns, and you're right to be peeved, but this is the decision we're making, and that's what I expect you to do.
When you have made a mistake or gone the wrong way, how do you correct that and then keep moving forward, especially being in the public so much?
Well, sometimes things move so quickly in politics, and so the news cycle demands a response, and sometimes your response might have to mature during the day because there are further facts that have come out or unintended consequences, and your initial response probably wasn't as considered as it could be. But that is just a function of the timing and the demands for for an immediate answer to a question from the media, etc. So I think sometimes you can do it without people noticing, but you know yourself that you haven't got that right, and you need to patch it up. And in other circumstances, it's obvious that you've got something wrong, and it's it's across the front pages of the newspaper. So sometimes in the game, it's hard to patch over.
I can imagine it's tough if you're given a certain amount of information in the morning. You say something, you get more information that night, you say something else, and then they say you were wrong.
Well, that's right, and especially, and not just in government, but in the defence role or home affairs, where you've got an operational portfolio, they talk about the fog of war. So the initial report is generally not the most accurate because they're rushing to get detail to you before you get caught on the hop somewhere, or if you're going to get, if you're attending a public event, they want you to have that information in case you're caught by the cameras or whatever. And they just want to respond in a professional way to their boss or to the minister. And sometimes you need to remind yourself, hang on, that there are a lot of moving parts here, and that part didn't sound right, or this didn't add up. And I think we're better off just to bite our tongue until we get sort of a bit more clarity about what's happening at that, that police incident, or if there's been an accident somewhere, or whatever it might be.
So interesting. So nearly the first report you get sometimes can be strayed due to the fog.
Yeah, and sometimes it's sort of Chinese whispers because it's come out of the field, and maybe the communications may not be great, might be patchy, and so there are different reasons, and people might put a bit of a slant on the version that's coming out, and by the time it gets through 3 or 4 hands to you, it's sometimes it's not. It turns out in hindsight not to have been as accurate as you would want.
In charge of something as important as the military, how do you make sure you do get the most true facts before making a decision that could impact everyone?
Well, I think people from the chief of the Defence Force down understand, and these are incredibly professional Australians. They're best in class. They have been trained for this position for their whole life. So that they want to give you the information and the facts, and sometimes it's beyond their control. But I think for them to have an understanding of what you expect and what you demand, and that's what they will strive to achieve, and the standard that they will seek to impose on their ranks below them as well, so that they can have the best information or the best package to provide up the chain.
Interesting. Now, with nuclear power, from someone like myself who doesn't know a lot about it, how long would that take to build, and why haven't we done it already?
Well, the reason we haven't done it already is because we've had a lot of coal in this country over decades and decades, and it's been cheap, and that's why we had Holden and Mitsubishi and Ford and Toyota manufacturing here. And when the cost of labour became more expensive relative, say, to China, and the cost of electricity became more expensive, then those manufacturing industries closed. So that was the reason that we didn't invest in nuclear at the time. Nuclear has been spoken about, back to middle part of last century.
Even Dick Smith, he loves it. He's been going on about it for years.
He's one of the smartest minds on energy and population growth in the country. So he's a voice to be listened to, and that's the reason we didn't do it as a country originally. We've got massive uranium deposits, and we export some of that uranium. The government obviously has signed up to the AUKUS deal, which is the nuclear propelled submarine with the United States and the United Kingdom. So there's no concerns about safety with the modern technology. It's like saying, is the iPhone comparable to the dial-up phone from 1980? Of course it's not. And so there are something like 300 reactors around the world now. And I think why a lot of younger people are really interested in reading about nuclear is because they know that we can't meet our net zero by 2050 target without having a zero-emission nuclear technology in the mix. And we have to have renewables in the mix, and we have to have nuclear. And we say that we can get nuclear into the system by 2035, 2037. But I think the timelines can be condensed if there's a bipartisan position. And I think there is common ground to be found. It may not be while Anthony Albanese's the leader, but if you look at sensible premiers like Peter Malinauskas in South Australia, Labor Premier there, the Labor Premier in New South Wales, Chris Minns, they understand, and they can have a mature conversation about nuclear. And I think if you look at the top 20 economies in the world, Australia is the only one that doesn't have or hasn't signed up to nuclear as being part of their mix. And if you were saying, I just want 100% nuclear and no renewables, I don't think that would be the right decision. And when you look at what Apple or Meta, Oracle and others are doing at the moment, Meta's just announced that they want 4 gigawatts of power, which is a phenomenal ask, but they want it for their AI and data centers. And they're only talking to nuclear power companies in the US. And they're businesses that we should be attracting to Australia. But at the moment, some of those centres would have to run on diesel generators, which is madness. And that's why I just think we have to have a mature conversation, stick to the facts, and people can make their own decisions. But when I've looked at what's happening around the world, I believe very clearly, very strongly that it's in our country's best interests. And that's why I think it's worth fighting for it, even though a lot of people just don't have, because we don't have the industry here, don't have the basic understanding about it.
Because I can imagine as you said, we want those industries. We want AI, which requires so much power, and we want to be able to fuel that. And if we have all the resources for it, we'd want to encourage those companies to come here because it helps the economy and builds it up. And don't we already have a reactor for nuclear medicine here? Would it be much different to that?
It's a really good point, and most Australians don't realise that. But when you go for certain procedures or a procedure in a hospital, you're utilising nuclear medicine. And at Lucas Heights in Sydney, there's been a nuclear reactor there operating since the 1950s. It operates safely. They dispose of the waste. And as I say, with the nuclear-propelled submarines, the government signed up to disposal of the waste, which we can do quite easily. And the latest technology of the nuclear is quite amazing in terms of the fact that it's got an 80-year lifespan. And that's why power is cheaper, electricity is cheaper under a nuclear mix energy market. In South Australia at the moment, for example, consumers there are paying about 56 cents a kilowatt hour, which is why your power bill is really expensive.
Everyone's feeling it, even my mum.
Absolutely, mate. And people switch off the lights. A lot of older Australians, sadly, will not turn on their air conditioner this summer. And this is why older people get heat stroke. And in winter, they don't turn on the heating.
Mum said her power bill went up 50%.
Yeah, well, this is... And as I say, people are doing everything they can. They're putting solar panels on their roof.
Yeah, we've got solar panels.
And it brings the power price down for a while, and then the price increases just overtake what you're saving through having solar panels. And there are a lot of families and businesses as well. And it's not just families, it's farmers who are paying more for their cold room storage for vegetables, which is why, when your mum's going or when we're going to the supermarket, the price of everything's gone up because the box manufacturer, the glass manufacturer, their electricity cost has gone up. So the 56 cents a kilowatt hour that South Australians pay now contrasts to, say, parts of Canada and the United States where they've got between 40 and 60% nuclear in the mix. They're paying about 18 cents a kilowatt hour, right? So about a third of what we're paying here.
Yeah, wow.
And that's because the cost of buying the nuclear reactors is spread over the 80 years lifespan, as opposed to, say, an offshore wind turbine, which is about 19 years. You take that out at the end of 19 years, it's obviously all rusted, you put it into landfill, and you've got to do that 4 times or 3 times, depending whether you can get a little bit more than 19 years, but 3 or 4 times compared to one lifespan of a nuclear reactor. And that's why you get reliable power, you don't get blackouts, and you can firm up the renewables so we can decarbonise and you can deliver power at a cheaper price.
Now, with the misinformation and disinformation bill coming out, I felt like it was a violation of free speech and was self-policing to speak out against. What were your thoughts on that bill?
Well, we came out really early on in opposition to it, and I thought it was sort of Orwellian in a sense, and it requires, any model that requires sort of permission from the minister to speak or to say something.
Risky, right? Yeah, risky.
We live in a society where there's free speech and we should celebrate it. And, there need to be guidelines and hate speech and whatnot nobody will tolerate. But for the minister to be starting to tell you whether what you're saying is right or wrong is not something we could support. So I don't know whether the government will try and take it to the next election, but I hope that they've heard the message pretty clearly that there's not support for it across the community.
Yeah, because I even got a lot of international backlash, even from the social media community, because as we post so much,
yes,
if you happen to say something that doesn't happen to be 100% right, or even right from a government standard, you could be up to be in trouble.
Yeah. Which, again, as I say, is just bizarre, and maybe it comes from a good place. I don't know, but I think they were poor in explaining what they were trying to do, and I think when people read the sort of the black letter law of what they were trying to introduce, it just created more questions than answers, and hopefully now it's it's gone.
Now, the other day I saw you hug on the Today Show with Bill Shorten. Do you reckon you've saw the divide?
Look, I always say when we go around to schools in my electorate and you speak to kids in year 6 or 7 around politics and being in Parliament, and they have all their questions, I always make the point of saying that there are good and bad on both sides of politics, and there are lots of issues that I could disagree with Bill on, and similarly with Richard Marles. I used to do the Today Show with him as well. But in the end, there are a lot of issues where we agree on, and you want the best for our country. We've just got different pathways to get there. So no, I enjoy his company. I had a beer with him the other day after his final speech in Parliament, and it was really nice because he had his family and his friends there, and he's contributed a lot to our country. He was a union leader before that, so it was nice to catch up with him. But of course, Carl tried to force us into this awkward moment of this man hug on national television.
I think he likes getting a laugh out of you too, Carl.
I actually enjoy it because Carl's, I think, one of the few journalists in the country who can really anticipate what the next question is to ask. And when you're on live television, it's a pretty rare skill, but he can sort of find a dynamic and find a bit of a funny angle to it. And generally they try and introduce a bit of a lighter topic so you can actually have, a bit of a laugh or, a bit of a joke at the other's expense, and some stupid photo they're putting up. So that day it was a man hug, and it worked out okay in the end. I
saw this one clip where Bill was talking about, it was an insect, and he rattled off some facts about an insect.
Yeah. I don't know. I need to know whether we were set up that day.
Yeah.
Like, is he just sort of some, freaky insect expert, or did he read up and...
Yeah. Was he tipped off?
Yeah, exactly. And did he just roll those lines out?
Yeah.
I don't know. It should be an inquiry into that.
It made me laugh for sure.
Yeah.
Now, the social media ban for under 16s. I know when I was 16, I used social media to build my first business, Sam's Jaws, and to watch Olympic diving and learn how to be a better diver. I see a lot of good in it. Why ban it?
Well, YouTube is not banned, so that's a really important part.
They sent us an email saying it is.
Well, it's not, and it's excluded under the bill. So
that's good.
Snapchat's captured though, because I met with some parents recently, one of whom had lost her son to suicide, others who had eating disorders, and when you look at the reels they were going through, it was really inhibiting their pathway to recovery. And there are other examples of, obviously sort of sexually explicit conversations and bullying and an online presence that is not the happy experience that you've had, and the way in which, I don't know, maybe your maturity and your upbringing and outlook have allowed you to apply a filter where others really absorb that grief. And for some kids under 16, it's a real torture. It's hard because it's obviously the way that, that people can connect, and through groups and sharing, videos and content otherwise. So I get it, but there's a lot of harm that's been done, and a huge rise in mental health issues in Australia, some of which I think is related, say, in Victoria to lockdowns during COVID, but other parts of it, I think social media has a real case to answer here. The only other point I'd make on that as well is that a few years ago, when I was Home Affairs Minister, I set up the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation, and that was concentrating on trying to stop pedophile networks from distributing graphic content and children being sexually abused, etc. When we dealt with the companies at that stage, with Facebook and Meta and others, they basically just gave us the middle finger and said that we're not going to help you in stopping that information being distributed between these networks. And it was a real eye-opener to me at the time, because I just thought that they would have the same moral lens as, anybody in
Especially
corporate
if you're
world.
curious.
Yeah, and what it said to me at the time, and I think what's really been reinforced since, is that they see a 14-year-old as, as a revenue model, and I just don't think we should accept a model that has a different set of laws and arrangements in the real world to what it is online. If you publish that content on the front page of the Daily Telegraph, you would be arrested for, the graphic material that you had published. If you send it in an encrypted message to a fellow pedophile, the company's protecting you. It just doesn't make any sense. So it's always a question of trying to strike the right balance. And we amended the government's bill so that the companies weren't able to capture data or biometrics or ask for a passport or driver's license details. And we thought that they were really important protections as well.
So with the social media ban as it stands, if I read them out, could you tell me which ones would be banned under this legislation?
Sure.
So YouTube?
YouTube's out, so it's not banned.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's my favourite one.
Yeah.
I learned so much on it growing up, watched diving, how to build a business.
Yes.
Really positive stuff.
Yeah.
What about Snapchat?
Snapchat's caught by the legislation, so not for under 16s.
Facebook?
Facebook the same. It's captured as well.
TikTok?
TikTok the same. So you've got those three. Instagram as well, and X as well. So you've got those that are captured by the legislation. And again, the whole idea is to try and provide a safe environment for young, impressionable minds online. I agree with you. We were really pushing in relation to YouTube, because that is the ability to look at, the way we watch sport or package up highlight packages, etc. that you're watching, and so I think YouTube's an important platform, and it's obviously increasingly popular. But a platform like Snapchat has, I think, been really difficult for a lot of younger people. And I think what will happen is that Snapchat, as I say, will create a different product for that under 16 market. And if they can do that, then it's a safer environment. And ultimately, what you want to see is the same rule of law applied online as it is in the real world. And hopefully the legislation goes somewhere toward that.
So if these platforms change their rules and have a safer version, will the government reconsider bringing it back in?
It's an issue for the government, but there's the ability for the minister to be able to do that, to work with the companies. And if not, then it can be changed, and you can amend the bill. So I think that's open to you as well. At the moment, TikTok, for example, say that they excluded 1 million young Australians from their accounts in the last 12 months. And that's, under the existing laws. And they're already, they're already trawling through, whether a 13-year-old is playing Minecraft and indicating that they're of a certain age. And they do that.
Is Minecraft here to stay?
I think Minecraft's pretty safe. I'm not very good at it. I haven't played it for a while, actually.
Have you been to the Nether before?
Yeah, but so my boys were right into it. It was huge in our house.
Yeah,
which they'd be embarrassed for me to say right now. I don't think they get on there now, but it used to be big. It's funny how they, I guess we all move through those different stages.
Yeah, I can agree. Snapchat is, because you send photos that go away, I think people assume they can say or do whatever they like.
Correct. Yeah,
which maybe gives people a false sense of.
And it's these guys are making billions of dollars. They're smart operators, and that might be a deliberate design feature of it as well, which they've exploited.
What's one of the biggest challenges you faced in your life, whether it's politics or business, and how did you get through that?
It's a good question. I guess, there are relationship breakdowns.
Like romantic or work?
Yeah. So, in your personal life, breakups from girlfriends, that sort of stuff, which are devastating at the time. And
did you hit the gym after that?
No, it's probably would have been a good idea, actually. I should have got your advice early on. But, and tough times in business where, there's been an accident, or there's been tragedy in one of your employees' lives, or or you're just doing it tough. It's a tough market, or you've lost a contract, or whatever it might be. So, but ultimately, they're all sort of life-shaping experiences, and that is, you look back on your failures and your mistakes, and whilst it hurts at the time. I really think you learn as much out of that as you do your successes. I'm a big believer in that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I remember back to 2018 with the leadership challenge with Malcolm Turnbull, and I think I lost 5 kilos in that week. And not what
taking the positives.
Yeah, that's it. So there was some upside. I think I put it back on pretty quickly after, but so you go through those stressful periods, and you think, I've had enough. I'm getting out. I'm not going to do this again. And then, and time sort of cures that pain and creates your curiosity in other parts of your endeavors, and ultimately you rebound. And I think that resilience is incredibly important. I've always been a big enthusiast of Winston Churchill's work, and that never give in strategy for me has really worked in my life, where some days you could just, pack your cards up and say, I'm done. I'm checking out, but instead you double down. And I think that's important.
I've faced that in sports so many times, whether, you go state championships, you train for years, you become the best in the state, then you go to nationals and you're back at the bottom and you work your way up. And then you go to an international comp and you're like, how can people even be this good?
Yeah.
And you just get knocked down every time. And like those days you look in the mirror and you're like, can I even be that good? But I feel like then when you come back and you achieve at that level,
yes,
like that resilience and that self-belief is what allows me to look at nearly any challenge and say, like, even if it's tough, I feel like I have the tools to at least fight through it.
Yeah. I think there would be a lot of athletes at the elite level, as you've achieved, that would give a similar account. And it's logical, right? Because it's a pyramid that you're climbing, and it's a competitive space. And sometimes even with that tenacity, people don't go through, or they're defeated. And what more could you have done? And I think sometimes that's an important question to ask yourself, because you can beat yourself up even where you've displayed the tenacity, you've got back up off the mat and it's still not worked out for you. And sometimes people can take that as, a really heavy personal blow, but I think that becomes too weighty if you're not able to reset after those experiences.
I couldn't agree more. Like the times that I've made a mistake and I was really hard on myself just didn't help enough. I think you've got to critically look at it, but then just not give up, because there's been times I've had the best preparation and done terrible, and then had the worst preparation and won medals at these events. And I think
it's also a game of snakes and ladders, right? It's a function of what your competitor is doing, and it's in our case, it's a 2-horse race for the prime ministership of the country, and it's as much what I'm doing or the mistakes I've made or the goals that we've kicked and as it is for Anthony, and similarly in any competition. That's the nature of it, and sometimes you're just up against somebody who's having a cracker that day, and the next competition they've lost their mojo.
I always find just by showing up, not giving up, I use the saying, just keep chipping away. Keep chipping away.
Yeah.
And if you chip away every day for long enough, things just work out. Have you found that true in your career?
Yeah, absolutely. And I try and still listen to, my kids in conversations with them as well, just that resilience piece. And it's in many cases, it is a marathon. It's not overnight success. Like you see, and sometimes you've got to be careful what you covet or what you seek. But when you look at others and the success that they've had, but in many cases, it's an overnight success story, 20 years in the making.
I've got this graph I show everyone. It's my YouTube I've been posting on for 10 years. Since 2014, I've been making YouTube videos, and a lot of people see my social media stuff and now they're like, oh, you just blew up overnight. I'm like, mate, I got like 2 views for 8 years.
Yes.
But you just persist, and eventually
it accelerated pretty quickly, but it was only 2 years after 8
years.
Look,
I get why they think the overnight thing, because you get this graph that goes up, but if you're giving up at even year 6, year 7, year 8, you never would have had the taste of it.
No, I agree. And there are also sliding door moments when you look back in your life as well, and you think, well, I could have taken that path, and my life would be completely different than it is today. And that can be for good or bad. It's they're decisions that you have to make at the time, and sometimes you live with that regret, or you look back and think, I don't know why I took that decision, but that was the best decision I ever made. And that is a really, powerful lesson in life as well. So that, I think the chipping away is a really good thing to have in the back of your mind.
And what about the diving? Would we get you up on the 10 metre?
So I'm not sure whether this is the, whether you're the right company for me to disclose this, but I can't dive, right? So I'm quite a reasonable swimmer. And when I was young, because I'm sort of 6'3", but I was, pretty fast in the water, but I could never dive properly. And
like into the water?
Yeah, into the water. And so, I hope this is not sort of a revelation to Annie. And but so I could do a great pencil dive, I guess. That may not get me the gold, of course, mate. But so maybe I need some pointers from you. But yeah, it's and I've never sort of gone back to do it. And I haven't done a lot of pool swimming over the years. More sort of at the surf and jumping through waves, and the rest of it's not proper diving. So yeah, it's sort of this embarrassing failure I've lived with since I was
we'll let that one slide.
Since I was at squad, many years ago.
Yeah. So were you one of those people that dove and did the belly flop straight in?
There was a little bit of that, yeah. And so I was very conscious of that then, and very sort of embarrassed by it, I think, when I was quite young. But once I was in the pool, I could sort of swim okay.
Catch back up.
Yeah, but I'm too old for it now.
I reckon the street cred you'd get from doing a pencil jump from 10 metre, I reckon it could do it for you.
You think so?
I think so.
I could bring home the next election with. I'll talk to the ad guys, see if they think that'd work.
Oh, just a pencil jump. I think I would do.
Really?
Yeah.
I think it's a niche market.
We could do it together.
Okay. Yeah. Why don't you go first?
I would.
Yeah, you go first. And I'll just see how I go.
Yeah, I might not see it at the bottom.
No, exactly.
Now, with Trump winning the US presidency, how do you think that affects Australian politics?
I've worked with as a minister with the Obama administration, with Trump won, and with the Biden administration as well. And in the national security space, it's always really seamless because their national security architecture is so strong, and Australia is such a significant ally. So they really bend over backwards to work with us as we do with them. So I've really formed a judgment that the redundancy and the layers of professionals that they've got in their system, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican administration, I think that's one of the true strengths of the American model. And they probably need that because of the scale that they've got and the size of the military and the size of the intelligence agencies and the threats that they face. And they're helping Ukraine, they're doing work with South Korea, they're providing support to the Philippines, they're working with us on the submarine deal. So there are so many pieces in their puzzle. So I think it will be seamless, and I think we'll work very, very effectively with the Trump administration. And I think they're really worrying times when you see North Korean troops going to serve in Russian uniforms, and countries in Europe who haven't thought about war since the Second World War are now starting to ramp up their investment in defence. They're worried about a broader war in Europe if Putin was to push the button. And so I think a strong America is incredibly important. And I think Putin and other dictators will be thinking twice about whether they're prepared to take Trump on or not. So I think we should all be working to maintain peace, and that's always the approach that I've taken.
That is good to hear, though, that no matter who it is, they've got good enough systems that will pretty much keep things running the way they should be. Do you think everything could simmer down and be all right?
I think it could, but there's a lot of intelligence out there, and that says that there are really worrying signs. And as the Prime Minister himself says, we live in the most dangerous period since the Second World War. And I think he's right. Like, if you look back to history in the 1930s, the collaboration, between people who shared values with Hitler, if that's a similar dynamic now with Putin or what we're seeing in the Middle East at the moment, the attacks, the barbaric attacks in Israel. These people don't have any regard for human life, and the young people have lost their lives, and the bombings that have taken place, etc. These ISIL, Al Qaeda, Hamas, Hezbollah, they just don't have any value for human life.
It's so sad to see because, I've travelled and competed against the best athletes in the world from all different countries, and you meet them one-on-one. They're just people.
Yes.
Everyone just wants to, be free, have their family, do what they like.
Yeah.
It's sad. It's sad to see because I think if you met some of these people, you wouldn't want to fight.
No, exactly. But in some cases, they're religious-based fights and fault lines that have been there for a long time and will be into the future. And but I think the world has a better chance of peace when America is strong. When America is weak and distracted and divided, I think that gives rise to people who don't share our values, and so we need to work very closely with the US, regardless of whether it's President Trump or President Biden or whoever it might be.
Now, you've got 3 kids around my age. I can imagine all looking to buy a house one day. The housings are, hitting close to home for you.
It's a huge issue, and so Beck's 22, Harry's 20, and Tom's 19, and they're all trying to save like crazy at the moment, staying at home for as long as they can to save a bit of cash.
I respect the hustle.
Yeah, and so it's really tough, and one of the things that I will never accept, if I'm fortunate enough to be Prime Minister after the next election, one thing that I'll never accept in our country is that you can only buy a home if your parents can afford to give you money. That's not how I grew up, and it's not how I bought my first house. And that's great if people can get that assistance from their parents or grandparents, but everybody should have the chance of home ownership. It's a huge part of our culture, and so we have to do a lot better in the supply side of housing. So bringing more houses and units on into the market, because if you've got huge demand and not enough houses, obviously the prices are going to continue to go up, and we're just pricing people out. So we've announced a $5 billion fund, which will work with councils to help pay for some of the sewerage and the water and road upgrades, because at the moment some of the councils aren't releasing land or developing land because they can't afford, they don't have the money to pay for those infrastructure upgrades. And so we think that will realise an additional 500,000 blocks of land, and putting that supply into the market, I think will allow a greater opportunity for younger people in particular to own a home.
So building out infrastructure, which kind of frees up new land so then people can then build?
Correct. Okay. So if you go out to, southwestern Sydney at the moment, councils there will say, well, look, we've got X hectares of land that we could develop, and we know that there's demand for and that young people want to buy, but we just can't afford the $25 million or the $50 million worth of sewerage upgrade or an extension of that road. And they just haven't got the balance sheets. The councils haven't got the money to be able to do that. So our discussions with them, and Michael Sukkar, who's our Shadow Housing Minister, has had a lot of discussions with councils around the country. And this has been one of the main impediments and one of the main bottlenecks that's stopping them bringing that land online. So if we can help them pay for that and get the land developed more quickly, I think that's going to be a real game changer.
It's amazing. I didn't even realise that was the bottleneck. I thought maybe it was just building, because I know immigration is really high. Yeah. Is it a combination of immigration and just basic supply and demand?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all of those things. The building code, we sort of platinum plate in this country. We're out the other day with Andrew Constance down in his electorate in Gilmore and talking to some builders down there. There was a change made to the building code about the way in which the floor system would work in the house, particularly around the wet areas. And the change that had been made in the building code added $38,000 to the cost of a new home, right? Just that one change, which was about having an additional waste point in the bathroom, which we had done without for years and years. So it's like going in to buy a car and you're being forced to take every option. I mean, if you want to spend that extra $38,000 and you've got the money, well, no dramas. But we're locking someone out who can't afford the $38,000. Maybe they'll get a little bit less when they sell their house at some point, but it's not. The house is not going to fall down, and so it's the building code costs that are added to the price that you pay when you sign that contract with the home builder. It's all of the taxes that are applied that make it a really expensive product. It's the supply-demand issues that you speak of. It's the migration piece. The government's brought in 1 million people over the last 2 years. At the moment, the migration program is bringing in somebody about one person every 44 seconds, and that's unprecedented, and that's created a real demand for housing. When over the course of the last few years and COVID, and for the reasons we spoke about before, the houses just haven't been getting built, and that in part is what's driven prices up much higher than. I mean, you look at what's happening in the US or other comparable economies. House prices aren't as expensive as they are here,
especially compared to incomes as well.
Exactly, it's exactly right. I mean, it's harder and harder, and a lot of people just think, well, I'm never going to be able to afford to buy a home, and we have to make sure that's not their thinking, and that we can find a system and find a way through for them to get to get the keys in their hands.
As former immigration minister, did you see this issue coming a mile away, or was it different at that time?
Well, it was different over COVID, obviously, because we basically had no one coming here, and I think there have been other things that have happened in the economy. The NDIS, for example, employs 400,000 people now, and I think a lot of tradies have left trades to go and work in the NDIS. So we've got skill shortages. We've got an aging workforce of builders and plumbers and tilers and electricians and carpenters, etc. So it's all been this perfect storm. So some of it, I think, has been predictable. The unions also have demanded that the government take off the skills list of migrants coming to our country people with building skills, and I think that's really added to the problem in the last couple of years. So there are always different economic issues that you need to deal with, and the economy's booming or it's really in a downturn. And the migration program should be adjusted according to what's happening in the economy at that time. And I just think the government's really sort of pulled the wrong levers here and brought in a lot of people at a time when we probably should have been saying, let's wind it back because we just don't have the housing, for people to, we don't have the rental accommodation, let alone the ability for people to buy homes.
And being successful yourself, working with so many prime ministers, now being the leader of the opposition, do you have any principles for success you'd pass down to people?
Well, I think we outlined some of them before. That just that never give in, that tenacious attitude, and I think through life you can have money or not. The one thing that is most important is your name and your reputation, and I always think that is sacrosanct, and you should really, for me anyway, I think that's really, really important. People don't need to like you or dislike you or whatever, but I think when you're in a position in Parliament, you need to adhere to your values, and you need to have that as a guiding light for you as well. And for some people that's a religious element, for others not. And I think if you're able to be guided by that, then I think that's a good starting point. But I don't like to lecture people on how they live their lives, and people face different circumstances. There are different tolerance levels for pain or for failure, and some people like to avoid conflict, and others are happy to meet it, head on.
Do you mind conflict? What's your?
I don't seek it out, but I don't shy away from it, and particularly if I think it's worth arguing for, and it's an issue that I really strongly believe in, then I'm happy to have the discussion and to really argue why I believe this should be the outcome as opposed to what they're advocating.
And my final question to you, Peter, what's your vision for Australia?
Well, Sam, I want to see a country where people can work hard and achieve whatever is possible for them. I want to make sure that we've got a country that takes care of people who can't do that, who try and fail, or they're born with a disability. I think we have a very real responsibility to take care of those less fortunate than ourselves. I want a peaceful society. So I think in an uncertain world, we need a strength of leadership, and we need the ability and the experience to make decisions in our country's best interests. And that is a really significant element to my vision. Nothing much matters in terms of what you've got in life if you're in Ukraine in the middle of a conflict. So it always puts it into perspective. I want a health system, and I want a system where we're aging, that we can treat people with dignity and respect as they age at home or in an aged care facility. So I think some of those basics are really important. I want the economy not to be an economic management, not to be an end in itself. I want the economy to work for us, not for us to have to work for the economy. And I think if you give people choices and you give them the ability to succeed and try and get government out of their hair as much as possible, then I think we've got a very bright future as a country. And I'm so incredibly proud of what we have as a country, and I'm very passionate and patriotic about wanting to defend it and passing it on in at least as good a shape, hopefully better shape, to the next generation as well.
I've been representing this country since I was very young as a diver, and I'm too, and very patriotic. I love our country. I feel grateful just to be an Australian. I wake up every day knowing that, just to be alive, to live in this country, I've already won.
Yeah.
The Honourable Peter Dutton, thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Sam. It's a great pleasure to be with you, mate. Thank you very much. And you inspire a lot of Australians, and a lot of young people have their lives changed for the better because of listening to you and your experiences and the success that you've enjoyed. So I really appreciate you having me on, and I wish you all the best. And I'm very happy you're a much better diver than I am. So
I want to see you diving now. Now I'm intrigued.
I promise you won't be seeing that.
Now I'm more intrigued.